What's up, patrons? It's Adi, Gate 7 International. We are back with enhanced analysis number 3. I know it feels like a long time since the last one, and that's because it has been a long time. Between the international break and then the suspended derby, we had to wait a long time to get to the content that we wanted. But it's here. It was the miracle we needed to keep our hopes alive, and we're not going to waste any more time. We're just going to jump right into the analysis and get chatting about it. Olympiacos gets the job done against West Ham in what was a major upset considering the resources and the value of both clubs. I know that my co-host Costa has talked about European pedigree between both clubs, but the fact of the matter is this day and age football is a different game. It's not like it was back then. There's a lot less parity between the clubs, especially the clubs of Greece and the clubs of England. So this was a side, like it or not, financially, this was a huge upset given the value of the clubs and the resources at each other's disposal. Now, the match was set up highly different simply because Coach Diego Martinez finally shifted and he used the 4-3-3 instead of sticking relentlessly to the 4-2-3-1. The major adjustment to the midfield included one, Sotiris Alexandropoulos bolstering the midfield alongside Mari and Heze. Heze, who was the anchor. Now, this change meant that Masouras would begin on the bench. The structure would give Alexandropoulos and Mari a little bit of freedom to get forward and press when they're not having the ball, and then when they have the ball to get forward with the ball without a lot of consequence to the center of the park. Note that I have Alexandropoulos in the formations here in the original tactical arrangement. I have Alexandropoulos as the center point and further forward, but I don't have Hesse centered and at the ahead of the defensive line. The reason is because based on the heat maps, Alexandropoulos spent more time further forward in that advanced position than Mari did, and he spent more time in that further forward position than Eze did in the deeper lying position ahead of the defense. So that is why stylistically I included Alexandropoulos in that more advanced position. And this is something I will explain later. But there were a couple of other notable changes. One, Jackson Porozo was forced to start due to the injury to Freire. He wasn't ready yet. And Ndoye had the suspension because of the red card he received against Bachka Topola. Additionally, Francisco Ortega got another start in a major match ahead of Kini. He had started in the match against Panathinaikos, and he was used again today. So we are starting to see Coach trust Ortega a little bit more. And to be quite frank, I'm not sure why he didn't sooner because Ortega's defensive capabilities are no worse than Keeney's in any respect, but he offers us a lot more going forward. Anyway, back to the analysis at hand. West Ham lined up with a slightly rotated squad, which still featured Ben Rama at the 10, flanked by Kudus and Fornals, and then behind him, of course, Ward Prowse, who you guys know very well. Costa, my co-host, Costas Lianos, that is, has talked about him ad nauseum. And then, of course, the charge was being led by Ings up in front. Now, the first 15 minutes really went how we expected. West Ham was much more dominant in possession, high 50s in terms of percentage, and they did maintain a much higher match tempo than we did, especially in the beginning. I mean, if we're looking at number of passes per pure possession, it was over 20 passes per pure possession, and averaging 8 passes per possession. When they moved the ball out of the back, our defensive shape took on a 4-4-2 widespread. You can kind of see that here in the representation of the interlocking formations, how it kind of appeared while the players were moving around with the ball. And in that 4-4-2 widespread, Alexandropoulos or Mari were the ones backing up El Kabi in the press. Usually it was Alexandropoulos, but Mari was also up there leading the charge at times. And they were helping create pressure, and not just help him create pressure, but creating pressure on the secondary man, the person that was being expected to receive the ball. Now, through the first 15 minutes, as I mentioned, our press was relatively balanced, and you could see that based on the average possession of West Ham. They were able to control the ball. We weren't really going at them in an intense manner. Um, We didn't amass more than 2 shots. We had maybe I think it was 2 open play possessions all in all, but our real success in that first 15 minutes was in the disruption of West Ham's possession. Now, as I mentioned already, we were not super high press, but what we were was very coordinated. They did have more of the ball, but it didn't amount much to anything in the end. And that unison in our press, that collaborative, that structured press that we had when we did, more of a mid block, we can say. 5 of 7 dual wins, 6 interceptions, 3 of 9 in the air, all within the first 15 minutes. These wins helped us amass about 6 crosses into the penalty area. Didn't lead to much, but it didn't matter. The coordinated defensive press started to build our momentum in these first 15 minutes. Disruption of their play, getting stuff going in the final third, even if it didn't amount to anything, you started to see, hey, we're in this. We're getting into the final third. We're getting a couple cracks. Nothing really remotely scary for them, for them to worry about. But it was great to see us having the ability to put some pressure on them. Now, in the second 15 minutes, the pendulum did begin to swing a bit more in our favor. Now, there was only one shot by both sides in this interval, but there was an incredible battle going on in the midfield. As a team, we were dominant, dominant, clogging this midfield up. We won all 9 of the ground duels that occurred in this 15-minute interval. Intercepted the ball as a team 5 times and won 3 of 5 in the air. As a team in this 15-minute interval, we lost only 2 duels, which means West Ham only won 2 duels in this 15-minute period. Part of these wins that we had in midfield helped us spur 8 attacks forward and build on our momentum. Again, it wasn't the prettiest interval of play. In fact, our pass per pure possession was not that great. Again, we were sitting in that 4 during this interval. It was like 4.4. Not horrible, but not amazing either. And all of this continued to help us build this momentum. Everything that we did in open play was going to the wings versus the midfield. And part of the reason was even though we were doing a great job of frustrating West Ham and and dispossessing them of the ball, we couldn't get the ball through the middle of the park. And looking at kind of how things were when we had possession, you could see the clutter here. In the red is obviously Olympiacos, and in the black is West Ham. You're seeing Fortunis go into these central positions, and you saw him getting the ball in. But all we were usually able to do was get the ball out wide and get to the flanks because West Ham was doing for the first 30 minutes of this game. They were also doing a pretty good job of clogging the midfield up. So there wasn't really a whole lot going on except out on the width, really for both clubs. And the 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 really one of the more difficult things was kind of like these floating midfielders. You had both Ward Prowse and Susak doing this for West Ham, and even for us with Heze and Alexandropoulos, both teams being very balanced and covering their back lines with an extra midfielder. Now, in the final 15 minutes of the first half, the script gets flipped, and this is when some of the magic happened. Our team, Olympiacos, smelled blood, and the possession game drastically changed, increased big time in our favor. We went from sitting around the 45% possession mark for most of the match to going in this interval toward for the end of the first half, 60% possession. Pressing intensity was continuing in its controlled, very coordinated manner, but our astute positioning and collaborative marking led to a whole bunch of counters and shot opportunities. The real takeaway here, though, is that we finally penetrated the middle of the pitch in their final third. In this image that I brought up here, you can see the exact moment, bird's eye view of when Kostas Fortounis receives the ball before his goal. Now, it's no coincidence that the goals came at this interval because This was the first occasion where we had any kind of real breakthrough going up the middle. And not even just this. Fortuna and Pudence had some great dribbles even after the goal. Great dribbles, great runs through the middle. Now, if you guys remember the first run that Fortuny had, he gets the ball. So this is the exact moment he receives. So Jose has the ball here, and there's a lot of clutter going on. You have Fornals kind of this really isn't amazingly to scale. Fornals actually should be a little bit wider out. But Hazet plays the ball to Fortunis, and he's getting closed down by multiple players. And he dribbles by a couple players, gets that toe poke, and the ball goes in. That was the first really great run up the middle that really carved through the defense. And then a couple of minutes later, Costa would be on the other side of the field and do almost the exact same thing. Get the ball, cut by a defender, take his space up the middle, and then he played the ball down our right side through Rodinei. Pudence would also have some pretty good success going up the middle, albeit maybe a little bit further up the final third, but he would get some great dribbles in and carve a hole in there, really break down the West Ham defense. Madi had a couple of those as well. All of a sudden, following a little bit of a deflection, an own goal maybe, you would say, 2 goals later, Olympiacos are looking the dominant side, especially at the end of the first half compared to West Ham. West Ham did have a very good opportunity through Danny Ings, which was saved by Paskalakis almost point blank, but they looked toothless for very large portions of this match. Getting forward pretty well, but really getting only decent opportunities off of a set piece here or there. So, very good stuff for Olympiacos. Very, very great work. Now, as halftime came along, we kind of were all thinking the same thing. 2-goal lead is not a safe lead. Hell, we already knew this from Bachka Topola. They taught us that lesson. A 2-goal lead is not a safe lead. So, what we wanted to make sure we kept up the tempo, maybe try for a third if we could, but don't sit back and do not over adjust as well. That was the mistake we made against Bachka Topola was we over adjusted and we adjusted way too early. Now, to my surprise, second half came along and we didn't see a single change from Diego Martinez. I guess and that's really not that weird. It's not like he always changes right away. But during this whole interval, no substitutions. Sometimes that's odd. Diego Martinez usually makes a sub at this point, sometimes even doubles, which we've seen. But in this interval, both clubs came out to assert their dominance. I mean, right from the get-go, right from the halftime, the whistle starting the second half. Olympiacos' press remained structured, but man, it came more intense in this part of the second half. But so did West Ham's. Both teams, PPDA, passes allowed per defensive action, measured at 6. It is a very, very intense press. In possession, West Ham kind of returned to their dominance, but they didn't materialize anything really in open play. I mean, 3 shots that they had, 2 of them came from set pieces, one which was looked pretty scary for a while, but the other came out of a throw-in situation and didn't amount to much. They were unable to successfully penetrate the midfield, even during this time, no matter what they did. But to be fair to them, in the second half to start, especially during these 15 minutes, we also struggled to get through to their penalty area. We were putting the ball down the flanks, trying to get things work, but it failed. I mean, our only shot was like a 28-meter Madi shot. So things coming out of the second half weren't exactly how you could say promising for us. It was a struggle, but we were very aggressive and it seemed like we were still at least winning that midfield battle. Now, in the second interval of the second half, the 61st to the 75th minute, we saw this pendulum swing once again back in our direction. West Ham wasn't able to keep up their pressing intensity past that first 15 minutes, which is something we expected. If you guys remember the PPDA chart I posted about our whole group, West Ham lets up pretty consistently during this interval, and they did. Their press dropped to 23 passes allowed per defensive action, while ours kind of remained the same. It went up to 9, but still very intense. And we suffocated them. We absolutely suffocated them in the midfield. They couldn't materialize shots. They couldn't get much going in the final third, maybe, getting forward with fouls. But in this 15-minute interval, they had 37% possession. I mean, we really limited them. No shots, barely seeing the ball. In defense, our shape changed from that 4-4-2 wide set back to a 4-2-3-1, only this time in defense. And our first change would occur in this interval right at the end. Rodinei coming off, getting replaced by Kini. And fortunately, it doesn't look like he sustained a real injury. He was brought off. He was tired because we will need him for the return, the London match against West Ham. But Kini replaces him, and offensively, we continued to dictate the match. Carved ourselves 3 decent opportunities totaling about 0.36 XG. Not bad. Alexandropoulos would have 2 shots. One looked pretty dangerous, and then the other attacks came down the middle on the right side of the pitch, as we just continued to hammer down the final third. And then you could see here the shape was definitely a lot more condensed. When we saw what was happening, when we saw the adjustments that were made by West Ham, because during this interval they also made a couple of changes, or right before this interval they brought in Paqueta and they brought in Jared Bowen. We got a little bit more condensed because they weren't harming us from the width, but with players like Paqueta, I'll bring up that world class strike in a minute, and Jared Bowen, we have to be careful. So we just continued to smother that midfield area, not give them room to breathe. If you guys remember from some of the stats that we did pre-match, West Ham significantly more threatening up the middle. So clogging the middle, preventing them from getting anything going there, it was something that we needed to do in order to limit the amount of pressure that we would receive. In the final 15 minutes, this is when things really got hairy. I personally started to believe that, oh God, here we are. We're about to blow it again, just like we did it with Bashka Topola. Not necessarily because West Ham was like dominant. I mean, they did dominate possession like slightly at the end of the game, but we both teams had opportunities. We both had 3 shots, one on target. Our XG outlook was higher. In the final 15 minutes, it was 0.39 to point 0.3 in our favor. We had 3 solid opportunities. Another possession with Alexandropoulos drives towards the goal on that left side of the goal after getting a pass, a nice ball to split the defender from Fortuny, and he drives with the ball down on that left side, rips a shot. Was pretty close. Could have converted something there, if it happened again. Uh, Porozo would get a header off of, I believe it was a corner kick if memory serves. Very solid, very close to the goal. And then Costa almost doubled his count. He gets the ball at the top of the 18, rips a shot that goes just wide. But, West Ham in the end, off of a pretty lackadaisical and, unfortunate giveaway from a bad clearance by Kini. I mean, Paqueta one-time volleys this thing into the back of the net. Incredible strike from him. We would go on to make about 4 more substitutions, all after the 85th minute, which would do enough to hold our lead and then seal the 3 points. So the game, we get this miracle that we needed, and boys, we have to recognize a couple of performances, boys and girls. Even though everyone played well, there's a couple of names we got to talk about here. Obviously, Costas Fortunis, MVP as voted by the fans. He was my MVP for the match as well. But they talked about him enough on the game, the post match live. So I'm not going to revisit too much of that. The only thing I do want to say is that Costas Fortunis led our team in interceptions against West Ham. So for the track back critics, Costas Fortuna's heat map was all over the place. I mean, he's up, he's back. Led us in interceptions as well. So I'm just going to leave that for you guys. Daniel Podence, another one for a shout out, had the only two smart passes of the game. Smart passes are any passes that break the line of the defense and create a significant advantage in attack. That is what a smart pass is. Um, your more creative players, players with great vision, are the ones that are doing this. Now, a fun statistic about Daniel Podence, something that I didn't foresee that he would have an impact on coming back to Olympiacos. It wasn't something that he had an impact on in his first time here. We knew he was going to be a great progressive attacker, help us keep possession, help us get forward with the ball. But this vision that he's been showing since returning here is something different. He leads Olympiacos in smart passes, completed smart passes. That is a statistic, something that you would expect Mari or Costa to be a leader in, but it's Podence. Great game from him. Great runs, great dribbles, great passes. Happy overall with Daniel Podence's performances. Extremely happy with how he's been since he's returned. It's like he never left. Jackson Porozo, another shout out. Made a case for himself to be the number 2 center back choice, the starter next to Retzos. He was solid as a rock in the back this game. Just a couple of the stats, his personal stats. 2 out of 3 defensive duels or ground duels, as we like to say sometimes. 8 out of 10 aerial duels won. 4 interceptions, 12 ball recoveries, 8 clearances. Monster performance. He lost 1 duel in the penalty area through the whole game. 1. Not bad for a 20-year-old kid in his first start against West Ham, a team from the top league who won the Conference League as well. Not a joke. Good for him. And then offensively, guys, Barroso had some offensive stats too. He got his head on 2 balls off of set pieces. 0.36 XG, 91% pass accuracy. Not bad. Well done to the Ecuadorian. We also have to give some accolades to our mids. Mari, Esse, Alexandropoulos. That trio had a great game. We shared a graphic on social media indicating their combined activity, which was immense. Not to mention Alexandropoulos and Mari each had a number of shot opportunities, scoring opportunities. I mean, hell, Alexandropoulos probably should have had a goal, the number of opportunities he had. I do have to say, though, guys, that this 4-3-3, a lot of people were talking about, oh, we should see the 4-3-3 again. Let's see it in another game. I do have my doubts about whether or not the 4-3-3 can be functional against some of the smaller clubs or the teams that are going to sit deep against us. I think this is a formation that we need to use for derbies and for bigger games, for sure. But I don't think we have the depth to make this something that we use all the time. We just don't. We don't have the midfield depth. But happy that it worked. Happy that we have another tool in the toolkit of Diego Martinez for some of these big games because it's something that we desperately needed. 4-2-3-1 was not working against the big teams. It was working against everybody else, and I expect that something was to continue to use against Offi, but very glad to see that we have an option and a very nice strategy that can work against better clubs that we are going to face in European competition. Now, guys, I hope you enjoyed the third enhanced match analysis. Incorporated a couple of suggestions, changes you guys wanted. I was able to get the correct player numbers and names of the players as well on the tactics board. These are going to continue to improve with your feedback. I am working on trying to get video. I tried to put video in here, but I had already gotten in a test, I had gotten even in an unlisted video copyright flags. So I am working on that. If I can start including videos in these, I will. I'm going to do my best, do what I can for you guys. I hope you enjoyed the enhanced analysis. As always, any feedback is appreciated. Anything that can make me make a better experience for you, I will do. This is Gate 7 International. by the fans for the fans. We'll see you patrons in the WhatsApp chat. Have a good one.